Sean Connery's chart, as you know, he recently died. 31st October, I think, is when he passed away. And very prominent celebrity, very popular. Of course, you guys all know 007, right? He's the one who started that whole franchise of movies, and he's very talented. He was very well known during his time frame. I think he won a lot of Academy Awards. I know he won an Academy Award for I think it was Untouchables. I'm not sure, but he was very popular. And one of the reasons I picked this chart is because there's a lot of Raj Yogas here. Okay, of course, that's how popular he was. So he has to have a lot of Raj Yogas. All right. So as you can see, Sean Connery, born August 25th, 1930, 1805, and I have him born in Scotland, Edinburgh. Now, as you can see in his chart, the dual signs, the corners of the chart are pretty crowded. Okay, so all these planets are pretty much aspecting each other. So you can read a lot of things off of these energies coming together. So that's why down here you see Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. They're all in mutual aspect. Okay, all kind of working together. And then between the Chara and the Sthira signs, he has two aspects going on, the Rahu Sun and the Ketu Sun. Okay, so you have two of those going on. Now, again, when you read these things, for example, when you're looking at the aspects, just like you do in the Parashara system, you can read the aspects here as well. You can say, oh, Moon and Moon Jupiter coming together, Moon Venus coming together. He did have a great relationship with his mother, right? His father used to work in a factory, and he was working late hours, and most of the time he wasn't around, but they had good relationship. But that's probably the Ketu Sun that you're seeing here. And but he had a very good relationship with both his parents. He, in fact, apparently he had their names tattooed on his arm or something. The very close relationship. He grew up in Scotland, and pretty much he had a good childhood. And you can see all the Raj Yogas that are coming out here, right? So before we go to the Raj Yogas, let's look at our first slide that we looked at, which was the Karakas, right? So his Atma Karaka is Venus. It has 24 degrees here in Virgo. In the Parashari kind of system, even in the Jaimini system, you can kind of say that Venus is debilitated here, but it is with Mercury, right? So it kind of cancels that debilitation out. Now, his Atma Karaka is Venus, and it is in the 10th house. Now, this is kind of how you can read the Karakas in a person's chart. When the Atma Karaka, or the soul's purpose, comes into the 10th house, the intent of this lifetime for this person is to understand all the nuances, everything that is to do with the 10th house of career. Okay, most of the time when you see this kind of a configuration happening, where the Atma Karaka comes in the 10th house, you will see that the person would have held a lot of jobs, would have a wide array of experience in the 10th house matters. And they'll also become successful, especially in his case, because he has a Raja Yoga forming here. So, he was successful in 10th house areas, but the soul's purpose is to understand the 10th house. How do you work? How do you work with your boss? How do you have the kind of relationship with your manager, where you're always trying to do a great job, or you're changing your jobs. You're kind of trying to understand the nuances of various kinds of industries or jobs. Now, if you think about Sean Connery, one of the main indicators of this Atma Karaka coming in the 10th house is the fact that he started working very early. He was only 13 years old when he started working as a milkman. He used to deliver milk to people around his neighborhood and around his city. So, again, that's 10th house. When you have this configuration in a chart, the soul is like ready. It's like, let's learn this right now, right? Like ready to go and understand that area right away. So he started working very early in life. So that's kind of when, the Atma Karaka in the 10th house. So the soul's intent is being met early on. Another indicator that you see in his personal life is He had a lot of different kinds of jobs during his lifetime. He was so after he was a milkman, he joined the Navy. And it's not like he took one job and he was in it for a long period of time. He kept changing. And it was like life always put him in situations where he was moving from one job to another, learning about all these different career areas, right? So he was in the Navy, he was a lorry driver, apparently, he was a lifeguard, he worked in construction. He was an artist model. Apparently, he was a bodybuilder. He was, in fact, even I was reading on Wikipedia, he was a coffin polisher. I didn't even know there's a job like that. But again, the soul is trying to understand all these different areas, all these different ways of working, the 10th house kind of energy. And, that is one thing that you would see. But again, for him, notice you have the Venus moon here. So he does have a Raja Yoga happening in his 10th house as well. So he's not only going into all these different jobs, he does ultimately end up in a job where he is immensely successful because of that Raja Yoga. Okay, so remember that. Now, how do you apply this to the dashas, right? Because yes, the D1 or the birth chart shows you the potentials of the individual. It tells you what this person could or could not have in this lifetime. But when is this coming, right? So for that, you go to the Chara Dasha system. So over here on the top, you go to reports, dashas, and typically you guys would be going to the Vamshotri system. So instead, you go down to other Rashi dashas and click on Chara Dasha, right? There are 3 over here because these are different pages. Like I said, these dashas are so, like they're smaller time frames. There are many of them, right? So there's like 3 pages worth of it. So when you go into the Jaimini Chara Dasha, as I was talking, you can see the sign-based dashas. He started in Sagittarius. He had 6 years of that. Then he went into Scorpio. He had 7 years of that. And do you see these smaller sub-dashas here, how they are like months? So it's very, any prediction you make will be very specific to that small period of time frame. So this is one of the things my clients really like because, instead of me telling them, hey, this year is going to be great for you, I'm able to tell them, hey, these couple of months are amazing. This is when you should be investing in stocks, whatever you want to tell them in terms of prediction. This gives you a very accurate kind of time frame. And again, like I said, he may have 6 years of Sagittarius Dasha, but when you look at yours, you may have only 4 years. So that's another reason why it's called a Chara Dasha. It keeps changing for each person. Okay, there's a whole calculation around it, but the software does it for you. But when I do the course, I teach you how to do the calculation manually as well. So now, how do you see when a certain Raj Yoga is going to come into fruition? Where is all this happening? Where is his Raj Yoga happening in this chart? It's happening in the sign of Virgo. And look at this. He ran his Virgo Dasha. He had a 12-year Virgo Dasha. And remember, these dashas, the maximum it can go to is 12 years. When we learn the calculation later on, you'll kind of understand that. But he had a full Virgo Dasha. So he was lucky. There are people who will just have 2 years of Virgo and then, that's all they get because based on the calculation. But he had a full Virgo Dasha, which is important for this chart because first of all, this is where his Raja Yogas are, right? The main one, the Moon Venus one that made him really, really successful in his career. So what happened in 1954? In 1954, if you look at Wikipedia, is when he went into the movie industry. After he went into all those other careers, including being a coffin polisher, he went into the movie industry. He started with musicals, and that was in the year 1954. So as you can see, he has his Atma Karaka here in the sign of Virgo. He has Moon here, which is causing that Raja Yoga. His Atma Karaka is debilitated, but he has Mercury there, which is canceling it. Mercury is in its own sign, right? And Mercury, by the way, is also his Putra Karaka. Remember, that's another Raja Yoga. So he has Atma Karaka and Putra Karaka together, Raja Yoga number 1. Venus and Moon together, Raja Yoga number 2. And guess what? His Amatya Karaka, Jupiter, is also aspecting it by a Gemini aspect. So he has like, the Atmakaraka, Amatyakaraka Raja Yoga number 3, and Amatyakaraka, Putrakaraka number 4. So he has like 4 Raja Yogas going on in this chart. So this is amazing. And he ran the time frame of Virgo, right? That's another thing that has to kind of trigger it. Just having the potential in the chart doesn't actually bring all those opportunities in your life. You have to have the time frame to trigger it. So 1954, he goes into the Virgo time frame, and sure enough, he decides to go into, of course, he was doing the bodybuilding and all of that before that, but he decides to go into musical theater, and then he got the opportunity to go into movies. So that's kind of when it started. And this entire 12 years of the Virgo Dasha was very, very important for him, because this is what established him as a star, right? The Bond movies, I don't know the exact date, but I think it was in the 60s, early 60s. When he started, I think Goldfinger and all of those were in the early 60s. So the Bond movie started at that time. That's kind of what, really established him as a mainstream actor. And another thing that you can kind of see here, and this is again another nuance, I don't want to confuse you guys, but when I teach the whole course, this I talk about this more in detail. But the Amatya Karaka, Jupiter, when it goes 10 houses away from the sign whose dasha you're running, it gets triggered. So not only is he triggering the Virgo sign, he's actually even triggering the Gemini sign during this time frame. So this is amazing for this person, right? So that's that. And then another thing that you see right here, let me just move this a little bit over, is what is his Dharakaraka? The Dharakaraka, the indicator of relationship in his life, is Moon. Dharakaraka is with the Amatyakaraka, the aspect from Jupiter, and the Atmakaraka. And this is another one of the little tidbits that, I can mention here, is that whenever there is this aspect between, so again, remember, we had 4 Raja Yogas. Now with the Dharakaraka coming into the mix, you have 5 and 6. So you have 6 Raja Yogas now happening in this chart. So whenever the Dharakaraka has an aspect from the soul's purpose, which is Atmakaraka, or the Amatyakaraka, which is the career potential, there is a very high possibility the person will work with whoever they are in a relationship with. And most of the time I've seen this, and I use these example charts in my course as well. Most of the time you'll see this in people who are either working with their spouse, or even I've seen it in politicians' charts like Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. The reason being because when they're out there campaigning and doing rallies, their spouse is right there with them. So it's kind of like working together towards a common goal, right? I've also seen it in Bill Gates and Melinda Gates' chart because they run the nonprofit together. So whenever the Dharakaraka comes in contact with the Atmakaraka or the Amatyakaraka, you'll see this a lot. So in his case, he, his spouse was also an actress, the person he married. So that's the reason why you see this here. And another thing with the Dharakaraka coming in Virgo and him running this time frame, that's a time frame he married. Okay, whenever you're in the Virgo time or in the sign dasha where this is getting triggered, and that's just one of the rules. There are so many other rules where it could go 7 away, and it could be in the Navamsha, and there are a lot of others, but I don't want to confuse you guys now since we don't have a lot of time. But that's just another little thing that you can look at when you're looking at charts and doing readings. If you're running the sign dasha of a particular sign and the DK or the Dharakaraka is there is a high possibility the person will come into a relationship at that time frame. Okay, so just another little tool that you can use along with your Parashara concepts, just to kind of look at that. Okay, so yes, so as I was saying, in the Virgo time frame, he came into prominence, he went into movies. After all the different jobs that he held before that, he finally went into the one that made him successful because of like 6 Raja Yogas happening here, which is amazing for this chart. And, he also married during this time frame. The Dharakaraka got triggered. So he married during this time frame. He married a person that he was working with. So that's another little thing that you can see here and all of that. Then another thing that we can look at is the Karakamsha Lagna, because we talked about that, right? So Venus is the Atma Karaka. Remember how I talked about calculating the Karakamsha Lagna? Venus is in Virgo in the D1. Okay. So in order to see the Karakamsha Lagna, and the easy way to remember that is Karakamsha stands for Karaka plus Amsha. So Atma Karaka plus the Navamsha. Bring that together, it's Karakamsha. So you see where Venus is in the Navamsha chart. You can see it's in Leo. So what does that make Leo? It makes Leo his Karakamsha Lagna. So you bring Leo back into the birth chart, make it the first house. And now you can read the whole chart using Leo as his first house from more of a professional or a career standpoint, I would say. Okay. So if you make Leo his first house, what falls in his first house? Neptune, ruling movies and film and theater and all of that. He has that right on his Karakamsha Lagna. It's probably what finally took him into that industry, right? A person who has held so many different varied kinds of jobs, you know, with Neptune on his Karakamsha Lagna, that's finally where he ended in the movie industry, right? And then you can read the whole chart using the Karakamsha Lagna, and we don't have time for that now, but if you want to do that, you can do that. Like, with the second house, you can see all his Raj Yoga happening in the second from the Karakamsha Lagna. So that made him very wealthy, right? You can see the 11th house has activity too. So that's again, all of that connection between the 2 and 11, that's a Dhana Yoga, right? So all you can see, you can read the chart, the whole chart using that, but just the concept for now, right? So that's what the concept is. So you can have Leo as the Karakamsha Lagna, okay? Now, another thing you also, if you want to notice, is the Rahu aspect on the Karakamsha Lagna. So that magnifies it, right? It makes it bigger. So that's the reason why, he was so successful in the movie industry, okay? Now let's look at the Arishta Yoga that happened around the time of his death. Now, that's one of the more challenging yogas that I was saying. For looking at the Arishta Yoga, you look at the GK. His GK is Mars, the Natikaraka. That's the one that causes a little problem in lifetime. And you can see that whenever you look at, the Arishta Yoga, you can look at the Parashara system, and then you can look at the Jaimini system to see if it's supporting it. Because, and I think when I teach the course, I usually use JFK's chart. You can see the assassination very clearly using the Jaimini system. But so if you look at the time frame he died, I have his chart down here, the around the time frame that this is the day he died. So October 31st, 2020, he was 90 years old. And in the Vamshotri, if you see, he was running Mercury, Saturn. Let's go up. Yeah, he was running Mercury, Saturn at that time frame. And again, from a Parashara system, you can see right away that Mercury rules as 7th, Saturn rules as 2nd. So the Maraka houses are getting triggered, kind of, right? And in addition to that, there may be a lot of other indications here, but that's just one of the indications from the Vamshotri Dasha. Now, from a Jaimini standpoint, you look at the Chara Dasha, right, to see what's going on at that time frame. So I'm going to the second page because he was 90 years old, so he had already gone to the second page of the Chara Dasha. He was in a Scorpio Chara Dasha, right? And his son actually said that it wasn't a sudden, unexpected kind of death. He was sick for a really long time. He suffered from dementia and all of that in his old age. And, so I believe the Scorpio Dasha would have kind of started with, him being kind of under the weather and having some health problems and all of that. But then if you look in his chart right here, you can see that Scorpio is, first of all, it's natally, it's his 12th house, which is a moksha house. So he ran that time frame. But the reason why Jaimini Arishta Yoga was triggered is because his GK, which is Mars right here, is going 8th from the sign whose dasha he's running. Whenever the GK, and again, this is one of the rules out of like 20 or 25 different rules that we talk about, in the course, but this is an important one, right? So whenever the GK goes in a 6-8 relationship from the sign whose dasha that the person is running, it can bring health related problems. It can bring some challenges in their lifetime. And just because you see it like that in the D1, don't freak out and don't get scared, because it has to get supported in multiple places. Like, for example, you saw the Vamshotri, he's running the 2-7 houses rulers, right? So that's Maraka houses. Now, if you look at the Navamsha, what's happening there? You should see multiple things to come to a prediction. You can't just make a prediction on one thing. In the Navamsha, Scorpio contains his GK. So that is triggering that as well, right? The Mars is there in Scorpio. So not only is it in a 6-8 relationship in the D1, in the Navamsha, in the D9, it's actually in Scorpio. So that's kind of what triggered it. And then you can also see that when he ran this, transiting Ketu right here. If you look at the chart of his, the day he died, transiting Ketu was in his, 12th house. Again, 12th house is moksha, and he was pretty, I would say 90 years old. He's lived a full life, right? So when the moksha planet comes along, so it does kind of give you that tendency of leaving the body and all of that. So he had that in his 12th house. Now, one thing that I kind of want to touch on here is, and whenever I learn things, I like to analyze it a little bit further. Because when I saw this, the first thing that I thought of was, he would have run a Scorpio Dasha earlier too, right? It's not the first time he ran a Scorpio Dasha. So what happened the first time he ran it, right? So that's why I kind of wanted to touch on that. First time he ran it was when he was 7 years old. So he ran it for almost 6 years. So he was pretty young at that time. And, of course, he didn't die, right? Because he died when he was 90. But this whole configuration of the Arishta Yoga does not always mean that the person would, have a death kind of experience. In this case, it did, because, in the Vamshotri, you can see the 2-7 activation going on. And, if you look closer, you may see other activations going on too. So it kind of everything brought together the meaning of moksha. But the first time he ran it, he was very young. And if you look at this time frame in his biography, in his lifetime, he talks about this being a very difficult time for him as a child, because his family was very, very poor. And apparently he talks about in some interviews that he used to, because they didn't have space in the small little apartment or house they were living in, he used to sleep in the bottom drawer of the dresser. And that's one of the reasons he had to start working so early in order to provide for his family. He started delivering milk at the age of 13 in order to provide for his family. So it wasn't a good time. It was still triggering an Arishta Yoga kind of situation, the 6-8 kind of situation with him, because he was not very happy at that time frame. I mean, of course, as a child, growing up in a very poor family, not having any opportunities around you, and having to see your parents go through those financial difficulties day in and day out, it's not easy, right, on a child. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on. He did run the Scorpio Dasha before, and it did activate his 6-8 Arishta Yoga, but then things got better when he came out of that Dasha. Okay. So that's an Arishta Yoga. All right. So I kind of tried to touch on the highlights of the Jaimini system, but this is pretty much just the tip of the iceberg. All right. Thank you, guys. I'm so happy you guys were here, and I'm honored that I was able to do this class with